Hello, welcome to a special edition of Liberty Nation Swamponomics videocast. I am Andrew Moran, Ellen's economics correspondent. $28 trillion. This is the national debt total, and it will only grow higher from here on. But doesn't the United States government have a debt ceiling? Shouldn't this have prevented Democrats and Republicans from further fueling Uncle Sam's spending addiction? Not quite. Both sides are engaged in a bitter dispute over the debt ceiling. One side either wants to increase it or go as far as abandoning it. The other will likely raise it, but will demand some spending cuts. So, what's next? To help us understand the latest, please welcome a special guest to Swamponomics, Mr. James Fite, Liberty Nation's editor-at-large. Welcome, sir.
Howdy, howdy.
So, in between the budget debate, the infrastructure proposal, and the US debt ceiling, for those not watching CNN all day long or hitting the refresh button on libertynation.com, what is the latest with America's borrowing limit debate?
Well, it has been a dramatic week in Congress, and so I guess the brief recap would be a continuing resolution has been passed to fund the government through December 3rd, so temporarily. No debt ceiling increase. No infrastructure bills have been passed. The $3.5 trillion so-called Build Back Better Act and the more bipartisan one, I think $1.2 trillion is the actual total. And so, you know, once they finished the fight over funding the government, then they moved on to infrastructure. And now the question is, when will the debt ceiling be raised, or will it? And if we're really being honest, will it isn't even really the question. It's almost certainly going to be raised, but not yet. Right now, they're still playing legislative chicken.
Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin recently accused Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and the Republicans of playing with, quote, a loaded weapon on the debt limit. So what does the GOP want out of all of this?
I think, well, for one thing, I think that's a bit overly dramatic, but it's politics. What can you do? What I think the GOP wants out of this is leverage. So look, the debt ceiling is almost certainly going to be raised. And I think what Republicans want at this point, now that we're in fiscal year, 2022, and there are two chances to pass budgetary changes with budget reconciliation, I think they want to force that debt ceiling increase to be one of those chances, so that the Democrats they blow their shot at hey, maybe they can raise the debt ceiling, and then maybe they can get that so-called human infrastructure bill through. But then what? Then they've shot their chance at doing anything else. That's where the legislative process, Biden's agenda, grinds to a halt. And I think that's what they're going for, really.
There's been lots of talks as of late about going as far as repealing the debt ceiling. Four Democrats proposed legislation this past spring calling for its removal. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen recently endorsed the concept during a House Financial Services Committee meeting. And even billionaire Warren Buffett has gone on record calling the debt ceiling, quote, a mistake. So why is there a push on the left for scrapping the debt ceiling? And considering how much spending and debt have increased, does the limit even serve a purpose at this point?
Well, the debt limit hasn't served its intended purpose for a very long time. I think it's been raised 80 times or something like that. So the original idea of the debt limit was, yes, we can borrow to fund certain things, but there's going to be a limit so that we don't get to a point where decades later, here we are, 28.6 trillion in debt, I think. And that's if you don't count the unfunded liability, Social Security, that kind of stuff. Then we're looking at maybe like anywhere, I've seen estimates anywhere from 120 something to 150 something trillion. I don't know that it ever actually served its original intent, but it does serve a purpose. Right now, we're seeing that in the legislative process, it's leverage.
But when it comes to the leverage, is it sort of tilted in favor of the Republicans? Because Republicans seem to propose, no matter how minuscule they want, they always advocate for spending cuts, as opposed to Democrats, they want us to just spend more as much as possible. So does these debates benefit more the Republicans, especially in election years?
I think it does. But the alternative is the blank check, right? And I guess in the end, it is almost still sort of a blank check, but at least there's a little bit of pulling back on the reins a little. All right, well, hey, I think the best example is this $3.5 trillion bill, right? Almost all the Republicans and some of the moderate Democrats are saying, hey, we still need to tone that down a little bit. But the fiscally liberal Democrats are saying that's already the toned down bill. We started at $6 trillion. I think a lot of people don't realize that.
So there's always apocalyptic fear mongering that the U.S. would run out of money if the U.S. would ever hit the debt ceiling. But what are the odds that the American government, taking in about $3 trillion a year, even during the pandemic, would ever run out of cash?
Well, that's kind of a sticky subject. So last year, the tax revenue was, like you said, somewhere around $3 trillion, but also the annual deficit was about $3 trillion, which means it cost a little over $6 trillion to run the government. So it's all relative. $3 trillion is a lot of money, but it's not a lot compared to $6. So if you're in the red, you're in the red. And eventually, yeah, you'll run out of, you may not run out of cash when you can create that, but you'll run out of buying power as that cash becomes worthless. As far as this apocalyptic, the left is trying to kind of put forth this idea that as soon as we hit that debt ceiling, that's it. Every single dollar is spent. No debts are getting repaid. Everything's in default. The repo man's pulling the car. The sheriff's there to evict you. I mean, it's over. But in reality, it'll be a little bit more like what happens when any household hits a financial snag and doesn't have enough money to make the bills, right? You prioritize. So what's going to happen first? Well, that mortgage is going to get paid. That car payment's going to get paid. The groceries are going to get bought, even if you have to tone it down a little bit. I mean, the things that you have to have in order to survive are going to get paid for so long as there's money to pay for them. And other things, cable TV, that, the membership to the theme park or the zoo, that's gone. And at the national level, unfortunately for a lot of Americans, those zoo memberships and cable TV subscriptions and stuff, the Netflix and stuff like that, that's Social Security. That's, so the actual foreign debts and the debts to the people who have bought treasury bonds, yeah, that'll get paid. We won't legally default on the debt. But
now, I think the pressing question that most Americans have is, what about the taxpayer-funded barber inside on Capitol Hill? Will that remain open during the system?
Sadly, probably there will be, disabled people who need their check, who cannot work and need their check in order to survive. The elderly who have retired, they've paid into Social Security their whole lives, and now that Social Security check is the only thing that keeps them going. Unfortunately, they will probably be worse off than the beauty salon Nancy Pelosi goes to when everything else is supposed to be closed.
And finally, the inevitable conclusion is that both sides will reach an agreement. It's just common sense at this point.
It'll happen.
Is this all just political theater? Does anyone other than the politicians benefit from these routine battles?
I mean, it is mostly just political theater. But as to whether or not anyone really benefits from this, only in the sense that it does sometimes cause whatever crazy spending thing the Democrats are trying to pass, or really the party in power is trying to pass. Because remember, when the Republicans are in power, they're doing what the Democrats are now.
Yes.
So for the opposition party to say, hey, no, let's not raise the debt limit. If that scales down the taxpayer funded, I refuse to call it government funded because the government doesn't have money. The government has our money. The only difference is we don't get to pick where it gets spent anymore once they take it. So, as if it scales that down at all, then yeah, America in general has benefited at least a little.
Yeah, I remember the videos that went viral during early days of YouTube, and they were showing clips of Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid and other prominent Democrats during Bush's tenure, and they were talking about, how could you raise a debt ceiling when it's such reckless, fiscal abandonment? How could they do this? How could we have a conscience of doing this? And then a couple years later, the Democrats were supporting it, and then of course under Trump's years, Republicans are saying, you got to raise the debt ceiling.
Oh, of course, and I mean it's almost like they're reading the same teleprompter script. but no, and that whole argument is kind of is evidence of that one layer thinking, right? That one level deep thinking of like, oh, well, we have to raise the debt ceiling because, it's not about what we're doing right now. I think the figure is something like 97% of the national debt is past administrations. That's true. But the more debt we add on now, we're just becoming that past administration for the future, right? So
Biden, he accounts for, I think, $800 billion of the current national debt. But of course, that's going to increase.
Right, it'll increase. And then, whoever's in office next go around, well, when they make their argument to raise the debt ceiling, they're going to go, well, look, it was Biden's fault and everybody before him, not ours. We just have to pay for the debt. All we have to be able to do is, pay the debts that we've already borrowed. When the real answer is, you need to cut back on the borrowing, and then you can worry about, making that argument.
Good points, Mr. Fight. So despite the hand-wringing, pearl-clutching, and apocalyptic doomsday scenario, both sides will reach an 11th hour deal and avoid a default, as has been the case for years now. Will this serve as a wake-up call to curb America's ferocious spending? If history's a record, the answer is a resounding no. That's it for me this week. I'd like to thank Mr. Fight for coming on to the program. You can check his impressive work on the latest budget drama on LibertyNation.com. It really is great reporting. Also, please check my full Swamponomics column where I dive into the Federal Reserve and Bitcoin, the stock market, and making consumer spending great again. Thank you.
Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.